"My move is just temporary, Mom," her son had said, suitcase in hand, girlfriend in tow. By the end of week 2, he'd claimed her recliner, her fridge, and her quiet. Lisa called her controlling. Paula called a locksmith. She'd spent decades building that home. She wasn't about to be a guest in it. And when they came back from brunch, the keys didn't work anymore. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The front door clicked shut behind Evelyn Parker as she stepped into her quiet Clintonville home, arms full of groceries, the morning sun still warming the porch behind her. She paused mid-step. 2 duffel bags sat slouched by the coat rack, military green and overstuffed, smelling faintly of sweat and gasoline. Her fingers tightened on the paper grocery bag as she stared, unmoving. "Greg!" she called, her voice bouncing against the crown molding in her immaculate foyer. From the living room came the unmistakable sound of her son's heavy boots thudding onto her hardwood floor. He emerged around the corner, unshaven and too casual in yesterday's t-shirt, and grinned like he'd just won something. "Hey, Mom," Greg said. "Just until I'm back on my feet." He said it like a joke, like she'd already agreed. She hadn't. Before Evelyn could form a response, the door flew open behind her. Shannon breezed in, floral sundress flapping, lugging 2 plastic bags that rattled with chip bags and neon-colored soda bottles. "Hi, Evelyn," Shannon sang, brushing past her. "Hope you don't mind. We stopped at Kroger on the way." Evelyn watched, mute, as Shannon dumped the bags on her spotless kitchen counter. No produce, no milk. Just boxes of microwave dinners, a 6-pack of energy drinks, and what looked like a family-sized tub of nacho cheese dip. Greg dropped into her favorite armchair like it owed him something. "You still got Netflix, right?" Evelyn finally set her own groceries down on the entryway bench, the thin crackle of the paper sounding absurdly loud. Her stomach curled, not from hunger but from the old instinct that something had just shifted, and not in her favor. By sunset, the kitchen was cluttered with empty cans, chip crumbs, and dishes no one offered to rinse. Shannon had spread her makeup across the downstairs bathroom, and Greg was in the living room, sprawled across the couch like a teenager on summer break. One socked foot dangled over the armrest. A half-drunk beer can sweated on her coffee table. On the wood, not even on a coaster. Evelyn stood silently in the hallway, unseen. Her hands were folded tightly under her arms, holding herself still. "You're quiet tonight," Greg called without turning his head. "Everything okay?" She stepped forward slowly, the overhead light casting a halo on her silver-streaked hair. "I didn't know you were moving in." Greg shrugged, eyes still on the screen. "It's not like that. Just a few weeks. Till I land something." That was the 3rd time he'd said just a few weeks. Just until I'm back on my feet. Just family. Shannon appeared from the kitchen holding a plastic cup of wine. "We'll be out of your hair before you know it," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Evelyn didn't answer. She simply turned and climbed the stairs, each step slower than the one before. Upstairs, the hallway was still clean, still hers. She walked into her bedroom and shut the door behind her with a soft click. In the quiet, she could hear the laughter downstairs. Greg's laugh more of a bark now, Shannon's high and flinty. Something about a show they were watching, something about someone falling. Evelyn sat at her writing desk and opened her notebook, the one she used to track household budgets and reminders. She flipped past recipes and gardening notes and opened to a blank page. For a long time, she just stared at it. She thought of how the house used to sound, how the light filtered through the living room in the late afternoon, catching the dust motes in silence, how she'd once protected every corner of this space with intention, clean, quiet, hers. The laughter downstairs swelled. Glass clinked. Evelyn pressed the pen to paper and in slow, even strokes wrote, "Day 1. And then, Greg and Shannon arrived uninvited, claiming temporary, left dirty dishes, brought beer, took over my living room." She capped the pen. Her hand didn't shake. Downstairs, a bottle cracked open. Greg whooped. Shannon laughed like she belonged. Evelyn looked at the door and locked it. By mid-morning, Evelyn had brewed a full pot of coffee, wiped down her already clean counters, and set out 3 mugs, hers with navy pinstripes, Greg's old Ohio State mug, and a ceramic one she didn't remember owning but suspected Shannon brought with her. Greg slumped into the kitchen in a wrinkled hoodie, yawning like he'd been awake all night. Shannon followed moments later, her robe open just enough to make Evelyn uncomfortable, dragging her slippered feet across the tile. Evelyn cleared her throat. "We need to talk about the house." Greg poured coffee without asking. "About what?" She drew in a steadying breath. "No smoking in or near the house. Kitchen stays clean. Quiet hours after 10. I expect courtesy." Shannon snorted into her mug. "We're not teenagers, Evelyn." Greg gave a half smile that looked more like a wince. "We'll be fine, Mom. We know how to be respectful." Evelyn didn't smile back. "Then we won't have any issues." Shannon pulled a chair out, flopped into it, and immediately propped her feet onto the bench across from her. "Relax. It's not like we're trashing the place." Evelyn glanced at the crumbs already collecting under Shannon's seat, and then at the faint, greasy smear on the refrigerator handle. She made no reply. Instead, she walked to her notebook, kept now in the top drawer of her china cabinet, and uncapped her pen. On a fresh page, she wrote in tiny, precise script, "Day 2, rules stated verbally, no smoking, tidy kitchen, quiet after 10, no response beyond sarcasm." She closed the drawer softly. By dinner, the sink was full. Empty ramen bowls with clinging noodles, a greasy pizza box balanced on the stove. The scent of stale smoke floated in from the back porch, threading through her drapes like it belonged there. Evelyn pulled back the curtain just enough to see Greg out there, cigarette in hand, one foot resting on her outdoor bench, the one Harold had helped her build last spring. Ash flicked off into the flower bed. The sliding door opened behind her. Shannon emerged with a fresh soda can in hand. "Oh, hey," she said, catching Evelyn's glance. "It's just outside, not inside." "It's still my home," Evelyn replied evenly. Shannon took a sip. "Right, of course, but hey, it's not hurting anyone." That night, Evelyn lay in bed and listened to the muffled bass of Greg's TV shows reverberate through the floor. At 11:47 p.m., the canned laughter of some sitcom character echoed up the stairs. She stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. Another entry went into the notebook. Cigarette ash in flower bed, TV past midnight, sink untouched. She underlined the last line twice. The next morning brought another surprise. Her keys were missing from their hook. The hooks were part of a carved wooden board Greg had made her in high school shop class, back when he still finished things. Evelyn checked the kitchen counter, her purse, the console table. Nothing. She was reaching for the cordless phone to call him when she heard the unmistakable grind of her aging Honda Civic pulling into the driveway. Greg got out in jogging shorts, looking freshly showered and pleased with himself. "Where have you been?" she asked, stepping onto the porch. "Gym," he said, tossing her keys casually into the air and catching them. "You weren't using the car." "You didn't ask." Greg looked surprised. "It's not a big deal. I filled the tank." Evelyn stared at him. "That's not the point." He gave a shrug, brushing past her. "You really need to chill, Mom." She stood there another full minute before stepping back inside. Her hands felt oddly cold. Later, she recorded it in the notebook. "Unauthorized vehicle use, 8:20 a.m. Car returned 9:35 a.m. She capped the pen and stared at the neat little rows of black ink. The rules weren't working because the rules didn't matter to them. They had no shame, no boundaries, and worse, no reason to believe she'd enforce anything. That night, just before 10, Evelyn opened the fridge to find nothing familiar. Half a can of energy drink, a styrofoam container with greasy fries, and one of her glass storage bowls filled with what looked like takeout cheese sauce. Her own labeled Tupperware had vanished. She shut the door and leaned her back against it, chest tight with something beyond anger, something quieter, a low hum of violation. From the hallway came a soft knock, not on her door, but on the bathroom across from her bedroom. Shannon's voice, low and irritated. "Greg, hurry up! I need to shower." "No rush," Greg called back, laughing. "I got the good toilet paper in here." Evelyn closed her eyes. The sound of metal scraping metal was oddly comforting. Evelyn stood on her neighbor's porch, arms crossed, watching Harold Jennings swap out the deadbolt on Mrs. Willoughby's back door. His toolbox rested on the concrete stoop, organized with surgeon-like precision. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with faint hints of graphite and brass. "Kids these days?" Mrs. Willoughby huffed behind her screen door, her voice raspy with age. "Think they can just barge in and take over." Evelyn gave a dry smile. "Some don't even knock anymore." Harold glanced up at her over his readers. "Something tells me this ain't just neighborly chit-chat." She hesitated, then said, "Greg and Shannon moved in. Claimed it was temporary." He grunted, twisting his wrench. "That's how termites start, too. One day you blink and the whole wall's hollow." Evelyn gave a weak laugh. "It's only been a few days and the house already feels like a stranger lives in it. Dishes everywhere, cigarette smoke. They took my car without asking." Harold set down the tool and straightened his back with a groan. "Let me ask you something. Whose name is on that deed?" She blinked. "Mine." He nodded. "Then you're not trapped. You're just forgetting who owns the damn house." His words landed heavier than he probably intended. She felt it in her chest, in that spot just under the collarbone where things hurt quietly. "I was a principal for 30 years, she said, more to herself than to him. "I've written up high schoolers for chewing gum, but with my own son, I freeze." Harold wiped his hands on an old red rag. "Being tough's easy when you don't love 'em. Harder when you do, but still necessary." Evelyn looked out across the street to where her car sat idle in the driveway, Greg's hoodie slung across the dashboard like a claim flag. Harold stepped aside as Mrs. Willoughby cracked open the door to inspect the lock. Evelyn turned to leave, but he stopped her with a simple question. "You ever think about talking to someone? A lawyer, I mean. Just to know your rights?" She didn't answer. Not right away, but the idea stayed with her. Back home, the scent of burnt popcorn hit her first. She walked into the kitchen to find Shannon scraping blackened kernels from the bottom of her microwave bowl. "Don't worry," Shannon said, waving the cloud of smoke. "We'll air it out." Evelyn didn't answer. She just walked past, up the stairs and into her bedroom, where she pulled open the bottom drawer of her desk. Beneath old birthday cards and utility bills, she found the contact list from her retirement party. One name jumped out at her, Linda Charles, former assistant superintendent. Always knew how to get things done quietly. She called. "Evelyn." Linda's voice was unmistakable, warm, efficient, no time wasted. "Hi, Linda. Sorry to call out of the blue. I need a referral. Someone who deals with tenants and family." There was a pause. Then, without hesitation, Linda said, "Rachel Klein. Property law, downtown, sharp as a tack, doesn't play games." Evelyn jotted it down. She booked the appointment for Friday morning. When the receptionist asked, "Is this an urgent matter?" Evelyn replied, "It's overdue." That night, the house was louder than usual. Greg and Shannon were watching some game show, shouting out answers between sips of beer and bites of fast food. Evelyn stayed in her room, notebook open, phone by her side. She didn't write in the notebook this time. She stared at Rachel Klein's name in her call history, then at the appointment confirmation email. The bold letters read, "Friday, 9:30 a.m., initial consultation." It was a small thing, but it felt like momentum. A knock came at her door, softer than the last time. "Hey, Mom," Greg called. "Can you do a load of laundry tomorrow? We're out of quarters." She didn't reply. She didn't move, and it started with the bass. A low, steady thump that vibrated up through Evelyn's floorboards and into her ankles as she sat quietly in the living room, tea in hand, trying to finish a crossword. She glanced at the clock. 6:22 p.m. Then came the voices, laughing, shouting, multiplied. She heard the door swing open downstairs, the rattle of plastic bags, Greg's voice booming something about stocking up for the weekend. Shannon's laugh followed, a shrill bark that made Evelyn flinch. She rose slowly and moved toward the stairwell. From halfway up, she could see into the living room, two strangers already on her couch, red Solo cups in hand. A third woman in high heels sat on her ottoman, shoes directly on the cushion, texting while sipping something orange. Someone turned the music up. Evelyn didn't say a word. She stepped silently back up the stairs and into her bedroom. Her tea had gone cold. She set it down without drinking. At 8:03 p.m., Evelyn stood by the edge of the upstairs hallway, camera phone in hand. She didn't know their names, but the evidence didn't need names. Snap. A photo of the open beer bottles lined up on her window ledge, right where she used to display her snow globe collection. Snap. A group of laughing guests gathered around her coffee table, feet on it, drinks spilling, one of her vintage coasters discarded on the floor. Snap. The kitchen. Shannon reaching into Evelyn's spice cabinet with a smirking friend beside her, both drinking wine from her wedding crystal. Snap. A pile of cigarette butts overflowing from a flower pot on the porch, one still smoldering. Evelyn's hands were steady. She'd stopped shaking 2 photos ago. Back in her bedroom, she lowered the lights, sat at her desk, and opened her laptop. She created a new folder on her desktop and named it, in quiet rebellion, Occupant Documentation. Inside went every photo. Then she drafted an email. Subject: Noise, damage, unapproved gathering. Dear Ms. Klein, attached, please find photos taken tonight from within my home. I am the legal homeowner. These individuals are not tenants and do not pay rent. This party was not permitted. Property is being misused. Items are being damaged. Smoking and drinking in areas I've expressly forbidden. I would like to explore my options. Evelyn Parker. She clicked send before she could talk herself out of it. The reply came faster than expected, barely 10 minutes. Rachel's email was brief. You have options. Let's discuss Friday. Bring everything, photos, timeline, and notes. RK. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and let the silence of her room surround her. It was the only part of the house not vibrating with laughter. Downstairs, someone cranked the music louder. The sound of a bottle shattering made her flinch. Then Greg shouted, "It's fine, we'll clean up later." She didn't believe him. At 10:41 p.m., Evelyn went downstairs, not to confront them, but to get her charger from the kitchen drawer. No one noticed her. Shannon was pressed against the counter with a red-headed man Evelyn had never seen before. The floor was sticky. Evelyn's spice rack was knocked over. One of her framed photos, her with her late husband at Niagara Falls, was on the floor. The glass cracked. She picked it up silently, holding it like it was something fragile that had just died again. Shannon glanced over, noticed her. "Oh, Evelyn, don't worry. We'll fix that." Evelyn turned without a word and walked back upstairs. In her room, she replaced the cracked frame with a spare from her closet, slid the photo in like tucking away something sacred. Then she returned to her notebook. Day 4, unauthorized party, broken frame, unknown guests, cigarette butts and planters, spice rack destroyed, no acknowledgement or apology. She closed the cover, not gently. She stared at her closed door, listening to the noise downstairs. The living room that used to smell like fresh coffee and lemon polish, now reeking of beer and cheap cologne. And then, quietly, the sound she didn't expect. The faint creak of her upstairs hallway floorboards. Someone was coming up. Morning came late. Evelyn hadn't slept. She waited until the house was still. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator, the cicadas outside rising like static. Her slippers barely made a sound as she walked to the printer in the hallway alcove. The single sheet emerged slowly, line by line, legal and final. 30-day notice to vacate. Typed, signed, dated. She took the envelope, slid the letter inside, sealed it with a steady hand. She didn't rehearse what she'd say. She wouldn't need to. At 9:17 a.m., she found Greg in the kitchen, pouring cereal into one of her antique mixing bowls like it was a dog dish. Shannon was scrolling on her phone at the table, bare feet up on a second chair. Evelyn stepped forward, placed 2 identical envelopes on the counter between them. "This is formal notice. You have 30 days to leave this house." Greg blinked like he hadn't heard her right. Then his whole face hardened. "What the hell is this?" Shannon barely looked up. "Is this a joke?" "It's not a joke," Evelyn said. Her voice was firm. "I've spoken with legal counsel." Greg snatched the paper, scanned it, then slammed it down. "Are you serious? I'm your son, Mom." "You're also a grown man," she said. "And this is my home." "You're unbelievable," he snapped, stepping toward her. "You really want to throw us out on the street?" Shannon rolled her eyes. "You're acting like we trashed the place. Jesus, Evelyn, this is heartless." Evelyn didn't blink. "You'll need to find other accommodations." Greg's mouth opened like he was going to say something else, but he didn't. He turned away, pacing in circles like a cornered animal. Shannon muttered something under her breath and walked out of the kitchen. Evelyn waited another beat, then turned around and walked away, up the stairs, slow and deliberate. She didn't look back. Harold was already out on his porch when she stepped onto hers later that afternoon. He was sipping coffee from a stainless steel mug, sitting in a folding chair that had seen 3 decades of summers. He raised it slightly in her direction. She nodded once, tight but satisfied. "Thought I saw some fire in your step this morning," he called out. Evelyn didn't smile, but her lips twitched like they might. "They have 30 days," she said. "They know now." He didn't say anything more, just tipped the mug again, then went back to watching the street like it was a slow-moving movie. Back inside, Evelyn opened her laptop. Rachel's reply to the scanned notice was already sitting in her inbox. "Looks good. Well-worded and legally sound. If they don't leave voluntarily, we'll file formal eviction next. You're covered. RK." Evelyn closed the laptop, exhaled. Something inside her shifted. Not entirely relief, more like ballast finally moving in a storm-tossed ship. She wasn't safe yet, but she was steady. Later that evening, she opened the linen closet to reorganize it. She needed a clean task, something to fold, something to restore order. But the towels weren't where she left them. Her floral guest set, the ones she'd bought for holiday visitors, were gone. She frowned, turned to the spare bedroom door down the hall. The door was cracked open. She pushed it wide, and froze. Inside was no longer a guest room. It had become something else entirely. Her sewing table was gone, replaced by a full-length mirror leaned precariously against the wall. Her comforter shoved into a bin under the bed. The closet door hung open, stuffed with bright, trendy dresses and purses she didn't recognize. Makeup trays, curling irons, and shoes spilled across the carpet. A bottle of half-used self-tanner sat on her windowsill like it belonged there. Evelyn stared at it all, at her things pushed aside, replaced by someone who'd brought chaos and decided to install it like wallpaper. On the mirror was a sticky note in Shannon's handwriting. "Closet space. Hope that's okay." Evelyn's breath came short. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply turned, walked back to her room, and retrieved the notebook. Day 5. Spare bedroom converted into personal closet. My linens removed. My belongings displaced. No permission asked. Shannon note. Hope that's okay. She clicked the pen closed. She didn't want hope. She wanted control. Evelyn returned to the spare room the next morning, just after sunrise. The hallway was still, the rest of the house blissfully silent. She didn't turn on the light. She didn't need to. The gauzy curtains filtered in enough pale light to expose every inch of the mess. She stepped inside with care, as though the floor might give way beneath her. Her linens had been shoved into 2 cardboard boxes labeled MISC in black Sharpie. She crouched to open one and found the guest duvet balled up like garbage. Her heirloom quilt, hand-stitched by her grandmother, was crumpled beneath a pile of hangers. One of the embroidered corners was caught beneath the leg of a plastic shoe rack. Evelyn stood slowly, her hands curling into fists at her sides. On her former sewing desk now sat an acrylic makeup organizer filled with powders, brushes, and lipsticks, none of which belonged to her. High heels were scattered like debris across the floor. 3 handbags hung from the curtain rod by their straps like trophies. She reached for her phone. Snap. The boxes of linens. Snap. The heels and shoes blocking the closet door. Snap. The sticky note still clinging to the mirror, mocking her. Snap. The open bin of her winter sweaters, crushed beneath a pile of boots. She took the photos one by one, moving slowly, methodically, just like she used to during hallway inspections at the high school. Evidence first, emotions later. She emailed them to Rachel immediately. Subject: bedroom overrun. Rachel, this used to be my guest room. Now it's a closet. My belongings boxed and shoved aside. Please see attached. Evelyn Parker. She didn't reread it. She just hit send. Greg was pouring himself a second bowl of cereal when Evelyn entered the kitchen, still holding her phone. She stopped across from him. I went into the spare room. He didn't look up. Yeah? You had no right to let Shannon take it over. Greg finally looked at her then, blinking as though she were a static buzz interrupting his morning. It's not like we broke anything. You boxed up my belongings. You've displaced things that don't belong to you. Greg shrugged. It's just a spare room, Mom. Don't overreact. Evelyn stared at him for a long beat. That quilt in the bin? She said. It was sewn by my grandmother during the Depression. It belonged on a guest bed, not under a shoe rack. Greg dropped his spoon into the bowl with a loud clink. God, you make everything a crisis. Do you want us gone or not? Because honestly, you're sending some pretty mixed messages. No, Evelyn said flatly. I want you out. I've made that perfectly clear. Greg rolled his eyes and turned back to the fridge like the conversation bored him. Jesus, Mom. You act like you're being invaded. She didn't answer. Because she wasn't acting. She was. Later that day, Evelyn stepped outside to water her potted basil, just for the normalcy of it. The hose sputtered a bit before giving way, spraying a cool stream across her neatly trimmed flower bed. Harold, shirtless under denim overalls, was unloading supplies from the back of his van 2 houses down. She walked over slowly, still in her house shoes, her phone tucked under her arm. Busy day? She asked, nodding to the spools of wire and tools in his truck bed. Harold glanced up, wiped sweat from his brow. Old couple on Lincoln locked themselves out, took half the day to talk him out of kicking in the side door. Evelyn hesitated, then asked, You still do residential? His brows lifted just slightly. Sure. You thinking about changing locks? I'm not ready yet, she said. He nodded. But when you are? She met his eyes. I'll let you know. He didn't press. He just gave a small, respectful nod and returned to coiling wire. Evelyn turned and walked back to her porch, slower this time. Her house stood still and clean from the outside, but it no longer felt like hers. Not entirely, not yet. It was written on the back of a CVS receipt. Evelyn found it on her desk chair that afternoon, folded once, wedged between the armrest and cushion. It was Shannon's handwriting, looped, forceful, more decorative than functional. You keep pushing, and this house won't be so peaceful anymore. No signature. No emoji. Just the note, cheap ink bleeding faintly through the thin paper. Evelyn held it at arm's length, then laid it flat on the desk and smoothed it with both hands. She took out her notebook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote, Day 6, handwritten threat left on my chair, in Shannon's handwriting, full text copied below. Then she carefully transcribed the words, letter by letter. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly as she reread it. Her pen hovered just above the page before she added, implied retaliation, intimidation. Then she picked up the phone and dialed Rachel Klein. The attorney picked up on the second ring. Klein. It's Evelyn Parker. I received a threat. I'd like to read it to you. Rachel didn't ask for context. Go ahead. Evelyn read it aloud, slowly, without emotion. There was a brief silence on the other end before Rachel replied, That's intimidation. Not subtle, either. Don't confront them. Keep it. Photograph it. You're doing everything right. Document, date, preserve. Forward a photo to me when you can. I already wrote it in my notebook, Evelyn said, word for word. Good, Rachel replied. If it escalates again, you call the police. Threats turn the tide legally, especially in your own home. Evelyn thanked her, then hung up. She didn't feel fear. She felt measured. That evening, Evelyn made roast chicken. Real roast chicken. Not a microwave version or takeout rotisserie. She stuffed it with rosemary and lemon, basted it twice, and set the table for one. She even lit a candle. The sound of the oven timer was almost musical, sharp, final, precise. Downstairs, Shannon hovered near the refrigerator like a vulture circling an empty field. She opened and closed the door 3 times in less than a minute, muttering with increasing volume. Finally, she called out, Is there seriously no food in this house? Evelyn, seated at the kitchen table with her steaming plate and glass of iced tea, didn't answer right away. She took a bite, tender, juicy, perfectly seasoned. Then she dabbed her mouth with a cloth napkin and replied, There's plenty. If you buy it? Shannon scoffed but didn't respond. Evelyn cut another slice of breast meat from the chicken, letting the juice pool on her plate. She hadn't cooked like this in weeks. The scent of lemon, garlic, and crisp skin filled the space like a memory reclaiming territory. She didn't offer anyone else a plate. She didn't need to. For dessert, she had half a baked pear with honey and cinnamon. She ate slowly, alone, and not a bit lonely. Later, as she washed her dish and dried it by hand, she heard a door slam upstairs. Greg, maybe, heavy-footed and restless. She walked calmly to her room and opened her drawer. The receipt was still there. She photographed it under her desk lamp, clean and centered. Then she opened her email to Rachel. Subject: threat. Photo attached. Rachel, as discussed, here's a photo of the note I mentioned. Still documenting everything. No confrontation yet. Evelyn. She clicked send. Just as she was shutting down the laptop, she heard Shannon's voice from the hallway, low but pointed. If she thinks she's getting rid of us that easy, she's in for a surprise. Then Greg's voice, lower still. I'll talk to her. Just wait. Evelyn sat still, the light from the monitor fading to black. She didn't write in her notebook this time. She just slipped the receipt inside, folded the notebook shut, and placed it under her pillow. The courtroom was smaller than Evelyn expected. No towering columns, no oak-paneled drama, just a second-floor chamber in Columbus Housing Court with gray carpet, humming fluorescents, and a judge who looked like she drank her coffee black and hated lateness. Evelyn sat at the petitioner's table, composed, spine straight. Rachel Klein beside her was in a tailored navy blazer, no nonsense in her posture or tone. She'd barely said hello before opening her folder and aligning her notes like a chessboard. Across the aisle, Greg slouched in a wrinkled button-down that looked 2 sizes too big. Shannon wore a skin-tight black turtleneck and too much eyeliner. Her heels clicked like punctuation every time she shifted in her seat. Greg leaned over and hissed something to Shannon. Shannon rolled her eyes and whispered back, arms folded. Evelyn didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She had Rachel. The clerk called the case number. All parties present? The judge asked, flipping through paperwork without looking up. Petitioner present, Rachel said. Greg cleared his throat and stood. We're here. I'm her son. The judge glanced up briefly. Noted. Let's proceed. Rachel opened with a clean-clipped summary. Evelyn Parker, sole homeowner. Greg and Shannon Parker, invited guests turned unauthorized occupants. No lease, no rent paid, multiple violations, formal notice served, refusal to vacate. She passed forward copies of the 30-day notice, Evelyn's timeline notes, and a printed sheet of labeled photographs, trash piles, damage, beer cans on furniture, cigarette butts in flower pots, and Shannon's sticky note in full color. Greg stood up like the floor was on fire. She's exaggerating. We're family. She owes us. The judge held up a hand. You'll get your turn, sir. Rachel didn't flinch. She continued. My client is not a landlord. She's a homeowner defending the integrity of her primary residence. These occupants have established no legal tenancy. This is a civil enforcement of property rights. Greg huffed audibly. She's acting like we're squatters. I'm her son. The judge peered at him. Did you sign a lease? No, but did you pay rent? Greg faltered. We bought groceries. Shannon cut in, arms crossed. And cleaned, sometimes. Rachel didn't turn her head, but Evelyn saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward like a knife unsheathing. The judge folded her hands. Mr. Parker, your mother has a right to decide who lives in her home. Family status does not grant indefinite occupancy. You've submitted no evidence of tenancy, and her documentation is extensive. Greg shifted in place. But she can't just kick us out. We don't have anywhere lined up yet. Shannon muttered something under her breath. The judge's expression hardened. Is that a legal argument, Miss Parker, or just attitude? Shannon blinked. Sorry. Evelyn kept her eyes on the bench, steady and still. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but her hands were calm in her lap. The judge signed a document with a practiced flick of the wrist. Vacate order is granted, 30 days effective from date of original notice, which has already passed. Enforcement eligible immediately if noncompliance continues. Greg turned bright red. Shannon exhaled sharply through her nose. Evelyn didn't move, didn't celebrate, just nodded once. Rachel turned toward her, expression cool and victorious. "We'll follow up with the enforcement officer." Evelyn rose, collected her purse, and followed Rachel out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Rachel paused beside the elevator. "You did well," she said. "You were calm, smart. Paper trail was everything." "Thank you," Evelyn replied. Her voice didn't tremble. "I won't forget what you've done." Rachel nodded. "They'll either leave quietly or not. But either way, this is now enforceable. You're not alone in this anymore." The elevator dinged. As Rachel stepped in, Evelyn said, "I'd like to be copied on everything." "You will be," Rachel said as the doors slid shut. Outside, the air was crisp with early fall. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and started walking toward her car. Halfway down the block, she heard footsteps behind her, heavy and fast. "Mom!" "Greg." She didn't stop. "Mom, wait. Just talk to me for a second." She turned at the edge of the sidewalk. "There's nothing left to discuss." "You're really going through with this?" She stared at him. "You already said it yourself, Greg." He squinted. "Said what?" "That I'm acting like you're a squatter." She tilted her head. "You were right." She got in the car and closed the door before he could respond. They heard the knock before they saw the uniform. Greg had been slouched in front of the TV, remote in hand, dead-eyed from channel surfing. Shannon was barefoot in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while slathering peanut butter onto a paper towel. Evelyn was upstairs in her bedroom, folding her late husband's button-downs. Not because they needed folding, but because her hands wanted something old and familiar to hold. The knock came again. Firm, authoritative. 3 short raps, followed by 1 long. Evelyn stood and walked to the stairs without rush. She could already hear Greg's irritation echoing from the living room. "Who the hell is banging like that?" Then the door opened, and the air changed. "Gregory Parker?" the sheriff's deputy asked, standing tall in the doorway, the brown envelope already in hand. Greg blinked. Yeah?" The deputy stepped forward. "By order of the Franklin County Housing Court, this is formal notice of court-approved enforcement to vacate the premises. You've been given the required time frame. You are now in violation." Greg backed up a step. "Wait, no, this is unfair." Evelyn reached the bottom stair just as Shannon appeared from the hallway, eyes wide. "You can't just barge in here," Shannon shouted. "This is private property." The deputy turned slightly toward her, calm but immovable. "Correct, it's private property, and you're no longer allowed to occupy it." Shannon blinked fast, voice going brittle. "This is insane! We're family!" Evelyn stepped quietly onto the porch, her arms crossed, eyes unreadable. The deputy glanced at her. "Miss Parker?" She nodded once. "It's all in order." Greg turned to her, arms raised in frustration. "Mom, come on! You're really gonna sick the sheriff on your own son?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. The deputy lifted the envelope and pressed it into Greg's chest. "You'll need to begin packing. Now, you have 1 hour before we begin the next steps." "Unbelievable," Greg muttered, crumpling the envelope in his fist. "This is what you want? To embarrass us? Have us dragged out like criminals?" "You're not being dragged," Evelyn said calmly. "You're being escorted. There's a difference." Behind them, Shannon let out a theatrical gasp and leaned against the doorway like a fainting actress in a bad regional play. "Oh my God, I can't believe this," she moaned. "This is abuse. You can't just treat people like garbage." The deputy didn't flinch. "We're not here for drama, just compliance." Greg was pacing now, mumbling to himself, flinging open drawers as if daring them to stop him. Shannon stomped up the stairs and came down with an armload of clothes half on hangers, half balled in her fists. Evelyn didn't move from her porch. She didn't flinch at Shannon's glares or Greg's loud muttering. Across the street, Harold was standing on his own porch, leaning casually on the railing with his thermos in hand. His posture was easy, but his eyes were sharp. When Evelyn caught his gaze, he gave her a small, respectful nod. She nodded back. 1 hour passed in slow, jagged increments. Suitcases were dragged out, trash bags stuffed with tangled cords, shoes and toiletries followed. Shannon dropped a mirror. Greg cursed under his breath. The deputy remained steady as a metronome. When it was done, when the final duffel bag thudded onto the porch steps and Greg refused to meet her eyes, Evelyn looked down at the keys in her palm. Her house keys. She walked to the edge of the porch, crossed the lawn, and met Harold at the curb. She didn't say much, just leaned in slightly and whispered, "Change them. Tonight." Harold's brow lifted, but he didn't question it. He took the keys from her hand with quiet certainty, like a soldier receiving orders from a commander who'd finally decided to strike. Evelyn turned back to the house, her house, and walked up the steps without looking over her shoulder. Inside, the silence was jarring, not peaceful yet, not safe yet, but clean. The first lock came off with a soft metallic click, like a final period at the end of a long, chaotic sentence. Harold stood at the front door, screwdriver in one hand, new deadbolt in the other. His toolbox sat open beside him on the welcome mat. The porch light glowed faintly behind him, casting a long shadow over the steps. Inside, Evelyn sat at the window with a mug of black tea, both hands curled around the ceramic. The living room was quiet, no TV, no voices, no clutter. Just the quiet, rhythmic sound of screws loosening, metal turning, mechanisms being replaced. "New strike plates going in now," Harold called gently through the screen. "Everything'll be keyed fresh." "Take your time," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, almost serene. The locks had once been picked out by her husband, brass, polished, solid, reliable. But old things wear down. They stop resisting what they're supposed to keep out. It was time. By 8:45 p.m., the front side and back doors had all been changed. Every lock, every keyhole, every click point resecured. Harold handed her a new key, single, unmarked, gleaming silver. "One of a kind," he said. "No duplicates yet." Evelyn took it gently, as if it were something sacred. "Thank you." He gave a respectful nod and began packing up without lingering. As he turned to go, Evelyn stepped closer. "If they come back, I won't be answering." Harold met her gaze, quiet steel behind his calm. "They won't get far." She watched him cross the street, toolbox in hand, then turned and locked the front door with the new key. The click echoed louder than expected. This time it sounded like a beginning. Morning arrived gray and windless. Evelyn brewed her tea early and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sky shift through the window above the sink. At 9:12 a.m., the pounding began. First a fist, then a flat palm, then both. 3 solid knocks, then 4, then rapid-fire pounding, bam, 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 each strike more desperate than the last. "Evelyn!" Shannon's voice screeched through the front door like a banshee in a hallway. "Open this damn door!" Evelyn didn't move. She simply sipped her tea. A beat of silence. Then the knob jiggled, once, twice, stopped by Harold's handiwork. Outside, the porch boards creaked under shifting weight. "You changed the locks?" Shannon shouted. "Seriously? After everything?" Evelyn heard the thud of something soft hitting the door. Maybe her own winter coat, maybe a shoe. She kept her back to it. Then came Greg's voice. Lower, pleading. "Mom, come on, let's talk." She didn't answer. "We can fix this," he said. "I swear. We'll clean up. We'll find someplace soon. I was looking this week." "You can't do this," Shannon cut in again. "We'll call someone. We'll tell everyone what kind of mother you really are." Evelyn stood up slowly, walked to the notebook on her desk, and opened to a new page. Day 10. Locks changed. 9:12 a.m. Shannon pounded on door, yelling, screaming. Greg attempted negotiation, stated intent to fix this. No apology, no acknowledgement of order. She paused, then added, "No key, no entry, no power." She returned to her chair and watched the porch through the front curtains. Shannon kicked the bottom step on the way down. Greg stood for another moment, head bowed, his mouth still moving, but whatever he said, it was to himself. They left together. Not quickly, not confidently, just eventually. By mid-morning, the street was quiet again. Evelyn walked the perimeter of the house, checked the new locks, inspected the basement windows. She wasn't looking for reassurance. She was making a statement to herself. This house is mine. This peace is mine. When she came back in, she placed the new key in a porcelain dish by the door. Just one key. One copy. There would be no spares. The envelope arrived 2 days later, creased, off-white, cheap. The return address wasn't a law firm, not really. Just a P.O. box, a last name, Kozlowski and Associates, and an Ohio zip code scribbled in faded ink. Evelyn turned it over in her hands like she was examining something second-hand and already broken. Inside, one page. The font was too large, the language too vague, the threats too flimsy. Gregory Parker and Shannon Parker demand re-entry to the premises based on familial relationship and wrongful eviction. Failure to respond may result in civil action for emotional distress. This is your final opportunity to resolve this matter amicably before escalation. It didn't even cite a statute. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, then folded it in half with perfect symmetry and slid it into a manila folder labeled Post-Eviction Communications. The folder went into her cabinet. Next to it was the notebook. She opened to a new page. Day 12. Received letter from Greg's attorney, Kozlowski and Associates. Unfounded, no legal merit. Emotional manipulation, veiled threats, no response given. Then she called Rachel. "Let me guess," Rachel said, the sarcasm already warming her tone. "Poorly formatted, zero precedent, lots of emotionally loaded language, and threats with no basis in law?" "That's about right," Evelyn replied. "I could write a better cease and desist in crayon." Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. Rachel sighed on the other end of the line. "Ignore it. I'll make a note in our file, but you're under no obligation to respond. If they do try to escalate, which I doubt, they'll lose before they've even parked." Evelyn nodded to herself. "Good. And if you do want to hit back with a harassment claim," Rachel added, "you'd have every legal leg to stand on. I'll let you know." They hung up with nothing else needed between them. That afternoon, Evelyn drove to the sheriff's office in person, wearing her old navy blazer and pressed slacks. She brought a copy of the court ruling, the signed vacate order, and Rachel's summary memo. The deputy behind the glass didn't blink when she handed everything over. "Ms. Parker, yes. Evictions fully logged, enforcement complete, no pending objections or appeals," he said, stamping a sheet with a dull thunk. "You're clear." "Thank you," she said, then paused. "If they return, call us," he said simply. "We'll handle it." Evelyn drove home in silence, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the file folder beside her like it was a talisman. For the first time in weeks, she didn't double-check her rearview mirror. She knew it was only a matter of time before Shannon went public. It started with a Facebook post, text on a pink gradient background, all caps. "Imagine throwing out your own family to live like a lonely old hag." Then a series of follow-ups, screenshots of text messages out of context. A blurry picture of Evelyn from the porch taken weeks ago captioned, "This is what selfish looks like." The comments section split down predictable lines. A few of Shannon's girlfriends offered heart emojis and affirmations. Some cousins Evelyn hadn't spoken to in years chimed in with awkward comments. "Hope things get better." "Didn't know you were living with her, wow." Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't comment. She just opened her phone, found Shannon's profile, and hit block. Greg texted her the next day. "Can we please talk like adults? This is getting out of hand." She blocked him too. Then, as if flipping a switch, the air in her house felt lighter. No more buzzing phones, no more guilt-laced texts, no more poison in her pocket. She opened the windows. She vacuumed every room. She baked cornbread and gave half to Harold across the street. She began to reclaim the ordinary. The diner was tucked between a dry cleaner and a closed-down florist shop, its sign half-lit and flickering like it couldn't decide whether to be Mel's or me's. Inside, the booths were red vinyl, the lighting warm and soft, and the air smelled like butter, salt, and something fried just a minute ago. Harold was already seated when Evelyn arrived, his jacket folded beside him, a glass of water half full in front of him. He stood as she approached, not awkwardly, not theatrically, just respectfully. "You came," he said with a small smile. Evelyn slipped into the booth across from him, unwinding her scarf. "You picked the perfect spot. No music, no TVs, just pie and people pretending they know how to use ketchup bottles." Harold said, nodding toward a nearby booth where a toddler was making a masterpiece on his placemat. They ordered quickly, meatloaf for Harold, grilled trout for Evelyn, mashed potatoes for them both. No wine list, just fresh brewed iced tea and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. They ate in silence at first, the kind Evelyn liked, comfortable, not heavy. The clatter of plates and silverware made a kind of music, steady and reassuring. It wasn't until their plates were half empty that Harold leaned back and said, "You look lighter." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Lighter? Like someone who's finally dropped the boulder she's been hauling. She paused, set her fork down. Maybe I have. Must feel strange. It does, she admitted, like I'm still checking for cracks in the walls, even though the walls are finally holding. Harold nodded. It takes time. Peace isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's just the absence of noise. Evelyn sipped her tea, then looked across at him. You've helped more than you know. I didn't realize how much I'd forgotten what stillness felt like, what steadiness looked like. Harold gave a small shrug. Didn't do much but show up with a toolbox. You did more than that, she said, voice soft but certain. You reminded me that I still had a spine and that it wasn't rusted shut. He laughed, low and kind. Well, I knew that the first day I watched you kick Greg off your porch with one sentence. She smiled, the first one in days that felt real, not functional. Besides, he added, neighbors look out for each other. Always have. Always will. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Even the ones who pretend they don't need help? Especially those. The waitress came by with a slice of apple pie for Harold and bread pudding for Evelyn. No charge. On the house, she said, for regulars with good manners. Harold winked at her as she walked away. They lingered longer than they expected. Talked about books, about Evelyn's garden, about Harold's younger sister who'd moved to Arizona and sent him postcards every month even though she could just text. And then, somewhere between the last spoonful of pudding and the soft clink of their coffee cups being cleared, Evelyn leaned in and said, I used to think dignity was something you held on to. Turns out it's something you defend. Harold's eyes met hers. And you did. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Harold offered to walk her to her car, and she let him. At the curb, he hesitated for a moment. You ever need anything? Locks, screens, company? You just holler. Evelyn smiled. I don't holler. He tipped his head. Then whisper. She opened her car door, looked back once. Thank you, Harold. He just gave a soft nod and walked away, hands in his pockets. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before turning the key. The car hummed quietly, waiting. Downtown was quiet for a Thursday morning. The courthouse was already humming, but the law office where Rachel had set the appointment was tucked away on the 12th floor of a modern glass building, just above the trees turning orange along Broad Street. Evelyn stepped out of the elevator with her purse clutched at her side and her heels tapping a steady rhythm. The waiting room was cool and efficient, leather chairs, a muted abstract painting, the soft click of a receptionist typing behind a curved desk. Rachel greeted her at the door to the conference room, sleeves rolled, glasses perched low on her nose. I've got everything ready, she said, nodding toward the table where a slim stack of papers waited. Evelyn sat down, took a breath, and glanced at the top page. It was cleaner than she'd expected. Director? Final. I made the change you requested, Rachel said. Gregory Parker removed as beneficiary. The home, retirement accounts, and insurance will go instead to the Ohio Education Equity Trust. Evelyn nodded. That's the one that funds first-generation teachers? Exactly. Full scholarship endowments. They do good work. She picked up the pen without hesitation and signed the first page, then the second, and the third. Rachel filed each into a manila folder as she went, precise and wordless. When it was done, Evelyn leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. Not because she was tired, but because something had finally settled, like a train pulling into a long-delayed station. You okay? Rachel asked, softer now. Evelyn opened her eyes. I'm better than I've been in months. Rachel gave a half smile. You'd be surprised how many clients say that the second they take their children out of their wills. Not surprised at all, Evelyn said. She stood, smoothed her coat, and extended her hand. Rachel shook it firmly. "I appreciate everything," Evelyn said. "You were clear, that helps." Rachel's voice dropped slightly. "And you were brave. That matters more." They said their goodbyes, and Evelyn took the elevator down alone. Outside, the breeze had shifted. She stopped at the cafe across the street for a cappuccino, real foam, real cinnamon, and drank it slowly on a bench near the courthouse lawn. She didn't check her phone. She didn't rehearse anything. For once, her mind wasn't building a defense. It was simply still. When she returned home, there was a single voicemail waiting. She didn't even have to listen to it all. Greg's voice was unmistakable, tight with disbelief, stuffed with hurt dressed up as anger. "You really did it, huh? You actually took me out of the will? That's how little I mean to you? After everything?" Then, louder, "You think some charity's gonna love you back? You think they'll visit when you're old and sick?" The message ended with a string of muffled words and a final beep. She saved it, filed it with the rest. She didn't cry. Instead, she made herself lunch. Just a grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food for no one but herself. As she was rinsing her dish, she noticed the mailbox flag was still up. She crossed the lawn slowly, arms folded, and pulled the contents out. Ads, a water bill, and one envelope with a return address she didn't recognize. Neat handwriting. No stamp, hand-delivered, probably by the foundation. She opened it with a paring knife in the kitchen and unfolded the single sheet of paper. It was a letter. A thank you note. "Dear Ms. Parker, I'm writing to thank you for your contribution to the Ohio Education Equity Trust. Because of your support, I've been awarded a full scholarship to begin my first year as an elementary education major at OSU. I want you to know that your generosity is changing lives, including mine. With gratitude, A. Torres." Evelyn stood at the kitchen counter, holding the letter like it was a bloom that had opened without warning. She read it again, then a third time. And this time, when she smiled, it wasn't small or guarded or polite. It was joy, plain and proud. She folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her notebook, right between the last 2 pages. On a fresh page, she wrote, "Day 13. Greg left a final voicemail. I did not respond. Instead, I received a thank you letter, a real one, a life moving forward, a name I've never met, but already believe in." She underlined the name once. Then she added, "Legacy, rewritten." Evelyn read the letter again the next morning, this time slower, her tea forgotten beside her. The sun had barely crested the maple tree in her front yard, but the kitchen was already full of gold light. It poured through the clean window panes, warming the countertop where the letter sat opened like a page from something sacred. She read the final paragraph aloud, barely whispering, "I want to teach 3rd grade. My mom always said 3rd grade is the year kids either feel seen or start to disappear. I want them to feel seen, like I do now. A Torres. No first name. Just an initial, a future, and a voice that sounded impossibly young and certain." Evelyn blinked hard. One tear slipped down, then another. She didn't stop them. She'd cried plenty in the last few weeks, quiet, exhausted tears behind closed doors. But this was different. These tears came from somewhere full, not hollow, from something being restored, not lost. She stood slowly, letter in hand, and walked to the refrigerator. The door was bare. The calendar had long been taken down. The family photos were gone, boxed away after the last screaming match. Only the magnetic grocery list remained, milk, eggs, basil, scribbled in her own neat cursive. She slid the letter beneath a daisy-shaped magnet and stepped back. The handwriting, clean, sincere, was now the centerpiece of her kitchen. She exhaled and finally took a sip of tea. A knock came at the door, not loud, not frantic, just 2 short taps. She didn't tense. When she opened it, Harold stood there in his usual overalls, one hand behind his back. "Morning," he said. "Got something for your counter." He brought out a bouquet, sunflowers, marigolds, a few clippings of basil from his own yard, their scent sharp and fresh. "Thought you might need a little color," he said. Evelyn smiled and stepped aside. "Come in. Coffee?" Wouldn't say no. They settled into the kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. Harold set the flowers in the sink, found a vase without asking, filled it halfway, and arranged the stems without a word. Evelyn poured coffee, black for him, cream for her. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, steam curling above their mugs, the morning moving around them but not through them. Harold glanced at the fridge. "That your letter?" She nodded. "From the student. Torres." He looked again. "Sounds like someone who'll change a few lives." Evelyn stirred her coffee, eyes soft. Maybe more than a few. They sat in quiet for a while, comfortable, slow-breathing silence. Harold eventually leaned back and said, "This place feels different now." Evelyn nodded. "It is." She looked around the kitchen. The air was clear, the walls soft with light, and the shadows gone from the corners. Even the floor felt more solid under her slippers. "For a long time, I thought if I lost control of my home, I'd never get it back," she said quietly. "But that wasn't true. I just had to remember it was mine to begin with." Harold nodded once. "Some things don't need to be rebuilt, just reclaimed." The coffee cooled. They didn't rush. Eventually, Harold stood and stretched. "Gotta run. Got a screen door screaming for help over on Bishop Street." Evelyn smiled, walking him to the door. He paused on the step. "You need anything, more flowers, another lock, you just whisper." "I know," she said, "but today, I don't think I need a thing." He tipped an invisible hat, then strolled across the street without looking back. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment longer. The wind carried the scent of the basil blossoms inside. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. A neighbor watered a garden. Life went on, not in spite of the storm, but because it had passed. Inside, Evelyn placed the vase of flowers on the table, just beneath the letter. She looked at both. A thank you note. A new season. A new beginning that was entirely hers. She didn't write in her notebook that day. She didn't need to, because for the first time in a long, hard stretch of days, she didn't have anything left to defend, only things to grow. Evelyn moved barefoot through the house, the hardwood cool under her heels, the air still and clean like morning pages untouched. She didn't flip on the television, didn't check the news. There was no hum of someone else's music bleeding through the walls, no shouted laughter from unfamiliar mouths, no shoes in the hallway that weren't hers. The house breathed differently now. Room by room, it had softened back into itself. She stepped into the spare room first, the one that had once been a battleground of makeup trays and tangled heels. Now, her sewing table had returned to its rightful spot beneath the window. The quilt from her grandmother lay folded neatly across the back of the guest bed, hand-stitched corners finally free from plastic furniture and careless feet. She smoothed the fabric once, then moved on. The linen closet, restocked, reorganized. Not a single label read MISC. Her hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish. She hadn't used it since spring. In the kitchen, sunlight poured through the eastern window, illuminating the daisy magnet on the fridge. Behind it, the letter from a Torres. She read it again without taking it down. Just the way the ink curved in the signature was enough to lift her chin a little. On the windowsill, her jade plant, once knocked over, now upright and thriving, reached toward the morning light. She rotated the pot half an inch and misted the soil. Not too much. She'd learned what enough looked like. The kettle began to sing behind her. Evelyn poured hot water over her tea leaves and let it steep. No timer. Just instinct. She carried the mug into the living room and settled into her favorite chair, the one by the bookshelf that had survived 27 Thanksgivings, 2 granddaughters learning to read, and one husband who used to fall asleep with it reclined and a library book open on his chest. She sipped slowly. Outside, the breeze stirred the maple tree, its branches clicking gently like wind chimes made of bark. Inside, there was no tension waiting behind the silence, no dread buried beneath the quiet. It was just quiet, fully and finally. She looked around. No abandoned shoes, no empty bottles, no notes taped to mirrors. No one calling her heartless, no one taking what was never offered. The coffee table had been dusted that morning. A vase of fresh wildflowers sat on it, Harold's latest delivery, this time wrapped with twine instead of rubber bands. Her calendar was pinned back up, clean and hopeful. Next Tuesday, she'd plant fall mums. Thursday, a community meeting at the library. Saturday, a call with her niece in Vermont. Ordinary things, ordinary days, and she would decide how they unfolded. When she finished her tea, she stood and placed the empty mug in the sink. It clinked softly, like punctuation. Then she turned the lock on her front door, not out of habit, but out of intent. Security didn't mean fear, it meant ownership. She paused with her hand on the key still resting in the dish by the door. Only one copy, only hers. She looked around once more. This house that had bent but not broken, been misused but not lost. A house with a spine. A house that had chosen its person and waited for her to choose it back. Some days the world could feel unrecognizable. But this? This was hers. Always had been. Always would be. She pressed her palm against the cool wood of the door and closed her eyes just once, then whispered to no one and everything all at once. Some locks guard doors, others guard dignity.